This video presentation is made possible by the SLO County Department of Education and the SLO Co-Arts Collaborative. For over a century, the Central Coast of California has been a haven for people from all walks of life. Pioneers, entrepreneurs, farmers, innovators, artists, dreamers. People escaping the city life to find beautiful landscapes, rich culture, seeking prosperity, and most importantly, joy. For a lot of us, we find joy in art, whether we're makers or just lucky enough to enjoy the art of others.
Hi, I'm Peter Henry Schroeder. I'm a local documentary filmmaker here in San Luis Obispo County. I invite you to come with me now as we actually get to go talk to some of these artists firsthand and learn about what makes them tick. What are some of the challenges they face, and how do they do this on a day-to-day basis? Where does their inspiration come from, and how do they actually find the joy in their art? What really gives them that creative juice?
My name is Cindy Sassaman. I'm a jewelry designer. I work out of my home studio in Cambria, California. I own a company called Beryl Jewelry Design, formerly Sweet Bella. I feel very fortunate to be able to take something like a beautiful stone and make it into a piece of wearable art. Growing up, I had a really creative family, and my mom, at a very young age, would have us doing rainy day art projects. So one of the art projects that we would do was copper enameling. She taught us how to clean the copper and flux it and put the powder on it and sit it on the kiln without burning ourselves. I don't know why my mom thought it was a good idea to have an 8-year-old using a kiln, but we happened to be pretty successful at it. And it was always something. There was always something going on because my mom was creative. My grandmother used to give me her costume jewelry, and I fancied myself skillful enough to make something out of it, and so I would take it apart and put it back together, and most of the time I just ruined what she would give me. But I guess at a young age I had a fascination for making things, and also probably had a fascination with things that are really small. My mom was a glass artist. She did painting. My aunt was an interior designer, and she also made jewelry and did sculpture, and they were both my creative mentors. And I recently rebranded my company to name it after my mom, whose middle name was Beryl. I think that my childhood, being creative all the time, is just what pushed me to always want to do something creative. So it doesn't matter what I do, I just constantly have to be creative. I think it's so important. I mentioned about the art's being cut, and it's unfortunate because I think having that exposure when I was young really gave me, like the drive to always do something creative, whether it's cooking, traveling, making jewelry. I grew up in Miami. I went to the University of Florida and I studied journalism, and I just happened to take a photography class in the art department and absolutely fell in love with it. At the time it was film photography, and there were a lot of notable artists that were instructors at the university. Just being in that creative environment was so inspiring to me that I literally switched all my classes to studio classes. I went to college in the 80s when people were doing large format photography. And these were like massive prints that would go like above your sofa or what have you. And my pieces started literally getting smaller and smaller and smaller until somebody said, "Oh, it looks like jewelry." And I actually, at that point, had started experimenting with different emulsions and mediums, and I started putting photo emulsion on glass, and then I would take basically stained glass techniques and encase the glass in metal and add different elements that it literally looked like jewelry, and it was just a natural progression. I actually got a job working in the darkroom. As part of my financial aid package, I was the person who would check out the darkroom kits. As a photographer, you're hired and you have clients and you do what they want you to do. And I wanted to produce a series of art photographs as opposed to commercial photography. So I decided to go into display and visual merchandising because I felt like it was a creative field and I could make a living. Photographs themselves were a vehicle for my art. So it was just kind of like the chosen medium for my creativity. It wasn't, I see these people that carry a camera around everywhere with them. That's not me. I would create scenarios that I would then photograph, then I would then distort in some way. I started accumulating way too much inventory of materials. And so little by little, I started making jewelry and having these little shows in my house and selling my jewelry to my friends. And that kind of, little by little, it started kind of as a little side hustle. I would sell the jewelry so that I could buy more materials due to my obsession with the materials. So I really believe that one of the best things about making jewelry is being able to work with such beautiful stones. It's one of my greatest sources of inspiration. Being able to pick out these stones and make them into a piece of jewelry. It's just, nature is just fascinating to me. I could gush endlessly about how beautiful these stones are, but I feel honored to be able to work with them and be able to set these stones, and then honored that somebody would actually buy a piece of my jewelry and wear it. There's just so much interest. I do have a soft spot in my heart for turquoise. This is a Peruvian opal, gem silica, Larimar, kyanite, chrysoprase. I'm not looking for perfection in a stone. I'm actually kind of go in the opposite direction. I find that it's the imperfect stones that have the most amount of beauty. The one thing that always gets me is when a stone almost looks like it's depicting nature. So a piece of turquoise that has some matrix in it that basically looks like the Great Barrier Reef from space. The turquoise when it looks like it's the Great Barrier Reef from space. It's nature almost replicating nature. And it's those imperfections that make those stones so interesting. Or like, this guy's got pyrite in him. I go after opals that look like they are seaside settings, where you can literally see clouds and ocean and shore break and sand. I work with dendritic agate, which is basically mineral inclusions that have fossilized in between pieces of agate, and they create little tree-like structures in the stone that almost look like somebody painted them. It's the mineral deposits in mud that are trying to escape the mud as it's drying out, and they leave the little trails. You can kind of see from the side that it doesn't go very deep. Like he has to cut slice by slice. Boulder opals, opal doublets. There's even a black opal in there. It's kind of a mixture of stones in the pinks and green ranges. So tourmaline, sapphires, rhodochrysolite, pink opal. These are like landscape stones. So any stone that isn't the color that it's supposed to be is appealing to me. So sapphires are usually thought of as blue, like a bright blue stone. I personally like the sapphires that are not the colors that you would expect. So that's a black sapphire, brown sapphires, purple sapphires, even some green sapphires. So I think it's important that I know where the stones are coming from. And when you buy them at shows, they could be coming from anywhere. But if I'm going directly to the source, then I know who's cutting them and what the conditions are of their workshops. The guy that I get my dendritic agates from is in India, and he's the actual cutter. And so I know that they're coming from him. There's a lot of corruption in mining. There's a lot, I mean, there's a real fine balance in kind of like being conscious of the materials that you're using. Both some of the processes for refining metals can be toxic. Some of the chemicals used in the jewelry industry can be toxic. I try to use non-toxic chemicals. I dispose of everything properly. And then especially stones. If you're not careful, I mean, everybody's heard of blood diamonds, but there's also a lot of other stones that, the setups for these processing centers where they're processing these stones are not always using the best labor practices. So you have to be careful where your stones come from. Basically, when I'm shopping for stones, that's what I do. I look at the stone and then I put it on my hand to see what it looks like as a ring. This is a new acquisition. Butterfly wings. I liked it, but I can't wrap my head around it. Certain stones, you have to look at it, and it's not just like what it would work best as, but how to do it. Like that's the question. And so sometimes the mechanics of building a setting for a piece are difficult. And so I have to marinate on it for a while before I figure it out, but challenge accepted. The more effort I put into it, the more successful I became. I did get to a point where I was mostly just beading and wire wrapping. I felt like you can only do so much with the skills that I had at the time, and that everybody had access to the same materials that I had access to, and so that I felt like I needed to, in order to set myself apart from the rest of the people that were making jewelry that were, not metalsmithing, I knew that I needed to take it to the next level. And so I took a metalsmithing class. And when I became a metalsmith, what I realized is that I just put myself in a different category. Okay, let's light the torch. So I use an acetylene tank. It's a flammable gas, and it mixes oxygen inside the handle, and then the flame is magnified with the oxygen. So in order to get solder to flow, you have to have a chemical called flux. It keeps the metal from oxidizing when the flame hits it and allows the solder to flow. I've already melted some solder on the bottom of this bezel cup, and then I place it on top once everything has flux on it. Then I apply heat to it, and the solder that's on the bottom of the bezel cup will flow, and they won't attach to each other. I don't know if you can see the little shininess coming through. This is kind of one of my favorite parts. That noise that it makes when it hits the water, when you quench it. Whoosh. So the piece will stay in the pickle for about 5 minutes till it's clean. Then it'll have to be polished and then tumbled, and then the stone will be set in the setting. The thing about metalsmithing is that you personally are taking these raw ingredients and you're fusing metal together and you're making something new out of them. You're creating something. It's basically alchemy. I want to make sure that it's flat on both sides before I continue to hammer it, or it'll get bent out of shape. And then as I'm hammering the metal, it's making the ring bigger, so I have to keep doing passes until it's the right size. And then it's a ring. And it just needs to be cleaned up. The one thing that metalsmithing affords me is that it gives me a little bit more creative freedom to make my own findings and set stones. The other thing that metalsmithing does is it makes you, it gives you the ability to make a ring. So when I was just beading, I could wrap wire around a stone, and I could wrap wire around a mandrel to make what was like a ring, but it wasn't really. Until you can fuse two pieces of metal together, you really can't make a ring. And hindsight is that rings make up about 75% of my business. There are a number of things that metalsmithing allows me to do, but probably the best thing is to set a stone. So these are various setting tools that are used to press the metal onto the top of the stone. This is called the Bezel Setting. And the first thing I want to do is secure the stone. And I do that by doing like a north, south, east, west, kind of pushing the metal up over the stone. Then I have a fancy tool that's like a miniature jackhammer. That can go all the way around. I don't want to do it too much because I don't want to break the stone. So I originally got into making jewelry because I really love stones. And I tend to work with stones that are imperfect, that have some sort of interesting formations in them. They tend to inspire me more than, say, a perfect diamond. I kind of let the stone kind of tell me what it wants to be, you know, by the shape, how it's cut, the color, the size. Fascinated by interesting stones that have different kinds of inclusions and variations in them, and I kind of let the stone speak to me as to what it wants to be. I don't work from a line card. I really like to work from inspiration, so I don't produce a line. Almost everything I make is one of a kind. And now I can do what other metalsmiths do. I put myself at the bottom of that category, and I'm slowly working my way up. I still am honing my skills. It's not, I'm not where I want to be. And so I take more workshops and classes to learn other techniques. Most of my techniques, I learned the basics of metalsmithing, both in a 6-week class and also in different workshops. But a lot of the skills that I've obtained are self-taught. Now that I've gotten to the point where I'm kind of maxed out on the skills that I have, I feel like I need to learn new things. And so I'm going to learn a couple of new setting techniques this summer. I'm taking a workshop in Australia. And I'm going to learn how to do flush setting so that I can set stones flush in metal. It's called the gypsy setting. Yeah, and I also teach basic skills. So I teach workshops around the Central Coast. I teach at Left Coast Art Studio, a beginning metalsmithing class called Metalsmithing 101. And it just basically teaches you how to solder 2 pieces of metal together and they make a set of stacking rings. So I like sharing what I've learned, but I also continue my education and learn new techniques. So every now and then I will come across some raw material that I want to work with. And this is a piece of abalone that I actually cut from a larger shell. I do a number of these different sizes of these hearts, and I cut them and grind them and polish them down, and then I set them in these settings. This tool is called a flex shaft, and you can add little bits to the end of it that have different purposes, like filing the metal, polishing it. So I just finished the last polish, and then this is buffing it out to a shine. And then it's ready for a chain. So I work with a number of stones, but I also like working with shells like abalone, especially locally sourced. And so this is a piece that I cut from a larger shell and polished and set for a pendant. You know, I'm operating a business, and so the amount of time that I'm creating at my bench is tempered with other aspects of the business that have to be done in order for me to make a living. And so it pulls me away from the creativity because I have to maintain a website, I have to photograph the inventory, I have to price things out and monitor my sales and market and all that, that it kind of pulls away from the creative aspect of it, and I would love to just be on my bench 24/7. I got approached several years ago. There was a rep that reps jewelry lines, of handmade jewelry lines, and she approached me and wanted to rep my line, and I don't actually have a line, so I at first was very honored that somebody liked my jewelry enough that they thought that they would go around and sell it for me, and then all I would have to do is make it. And then at some point when I was trying to decide if that's the way I wanted to go, I started to think about the fact that I'd have to create a line card, I'd have to make a certain amount of pieces that I could manufacture over and over again and do repetitions of. And I decided that that was not the direction that I wanted to go, that I felt like at this point in my life, I wanted to let the stones kind of move me in the direction of what I was going to make, and not because I had an order to fill. And so I do a good amount of custom work where I work with a customer and they pick out a stone and I make what they want, but I'm pretty good at keeping them in line with my aesthetic, that we're on the same page, as that I make what I make, and if that resonates with the customer, we can work together to make a custom piece of jewelry. But that I don't replicate other artists, and I don't change my aesthetic just to sell a piece of jewelry. And that's the other challenge in being a creative and having it be a business, especially a sole proprietor like myself. You wear many hats. I am the manufacturer, the designer. I am the person who sources the materials. I am the person who writes the copy for the website and photographs the pieces for the website. I'm the person who sends out the invoices and makes sure that the bills are paid. And so those aspects of the business are almost more important than the actual making, and yet those are the challenges for me, is to be able to balance all of that. I could easily just make jewelry and go work for somebody else and let somebody else do all the other stuff, and then just be a maker. I've considered it, but I definitely like being able to choose what I'm making and have that freedom to make what resonates with me.